After the cataclysm, levels appeared alongside monsters, becoming an absolute indicator of power that clung to people as well. In a world revolving around levels, the higher the level, the better. In the dungeon, a man faces Nurgle, whose level is an enigmatic question mark. The leader, at level 457, finds it inconceivable that Nurgle's level is unknown, questioning how they are supposed to defeat it. Someone urges the man to flee, but he insists they go ahead without him, explaining that if the monster escapes, Seoul will be in ruins. They need to buy time and wait for assistance from outside. As his men scramble towards the portal to escape, the man draws his sword, declaring that sacrifice is in his style, and leaps towards Nurgle to attack. He was about to strike Nurgle, but before he could, Nurgle hurled his axe, slamming the man to the ground. The system notified him that he had received an attack that exceeded his capacity, his guardian's armor was destroyed, and his health had plummeted to 5%. Struggling to stand, the man wished his level were higher to better combat the threat. As Nurgle swung its axe again, the man questioned if this was the end. Suddenly, a loud explosion occurred, and a figure blocked Nurgle's massive axe with just a small dagger, leaving the man in awe. Questioning the newcomer's ability to stop Nurgle with such a modest weapon, the protagonist confronts Nurgle, questioning its choice of hideout. The man cautions the newcomer as Nurgle launches another attack, but he nimbly avoids it. He then leaps onto Nurgle's hand, climbs to its head, and, with a swift motion, decapitates it using only his dagger, leaving the man in disbelief. He inquires about the newcomer's identity and level, to which he replies that he is merely level 1. But before that, our protagonist was in the dungeon, searching cacao books on how to succeed as a hunter. Cacao books suggested that with determination to put in effort, even to the point of being ready to face death, he could overcome anything. If he hadn't succeeded, it was because he hadn't exerted enough effort. Therefore, before he blames society or luck for his failure, he should blame his own laziness. Furiously, he slammed his phone on the ground and shouted, "That's funny." Then he peeked back at the dead monster behind him. 7 years ago, he dedicated a whopping 7 years, starting from the age of 20 until now, striving to become a hunter. However, the results have been disappointing every time. Various reasons accounted for the failure. The hunter exam involves tasks such as hunting assigned monsters in vast dungeons. In the early stages, with a low level, it was impossible to defeat the assigned monsters for the examination tasks. After leveling up, those with good equipment swiftly cleared the monsters, bringing the exam to an end. After working part-time all day to secure equipment, his stamina hit rock bottom, causing him to collapse during the exam. He looked at his cell phone again, angrily wondering who was the person who wrote the answer in Cacao Book because he wanted to give them a piece of his mind. Suddenly, someone shouted, calling him intern, and the hunter supervisor asked him if he had defeated all the low-level monsters on his end, and was now taking a break. He replied that he had killed them all. The supervisor told him that if he was done, he should return to the starting point and turn in the loot. Then he asked him why he was resting while looking at his phone and if he didn't want to participate in the boss raid. He clenched his teeth, knowing that boss raid participation does not take interns, but even if they do, they only take those with a lot of money or a rich background, which means the supervisor was trying to deceive him with a lie. Then he apologized to the supervisor and told him he'd head there right away. The supervisor told him to hurry up and said that kids these days are crazy. Then he ran away, thinking the supervisor was an old bastard. When he arrived at the starting point, he saw the other men gathering at the side. He wondered what it was because he knew that the first party members were more than the people there and questioned if everyone was just fooling around like him. Suddenly, someone called him future high ranker Lee Geonwoo. His high school classmate, Kim Min-seok, asked him if he had raised his level, but he just asked Min-seok back why he keeps mentioning becoming a high ranker when he has no intention of doing so and questioned why the party was so small. Then he told Min-seok that the other interns were also all low-level interns. Min-seok asked him if he hadn't heard from the hunter's supervisor that an emergency convocation order had been issued to the guild due to an unconfirmed A-rank dungeon popping up. Then, Min-seok shares that the rewards for clearing an A-rank dungeon for the first time are substantial, so much so that they easily overlook a D-rank dungeon like this one. This time, they plan to clear the boss with just the remaining guild members and 2 interns, which shocks him. Min-seok adds that it means they could beat the boss and level up today. They high-five together in happiness. He inquires about the 2 remaining guild members and points out that to take on interns and defeat a D-level dungeon boss, those members would need to be fairly high level. Min-seok admits he hasn't heard specifics but believes the guild wouldn't rely on someone incompetent. He also mentions the dungeon boss tends to self-destruct when its health is low. He knows that, despite the guild's emergency convocation, if they plan to tackle the boss with interns, they must include hunters of a certain level or higher, considering it a basic requirement. However, he questions the feasibility of such a plan. Then, he asks another man if he has ever tried catching Circlemus, suspecting among the remaining guild members. This man is the least experienced. The man admits it's his first time. Next, he questions the man about his experience in boss dungeon raids, to which the man replies he has none, having only observed until now. The man, curious, asks why he's being questioned and mentions looking anxious. Swinging his sword, he assures him not to worry, as he can rely on his gear. This man, named Choi Yeong, is the grandson of the chairman of one of Korea's leading mid-sized companies and has a level of 55. Geonwoo considers that even leaving a veteran hunter with a level over 100 might be insufficient, so they bring in a hunter with financial resources who tours dungeons. Observing a huge man nearby, he thinks if that's the case, what's left to believe in is the only one left among the remaining guild members, the hunter's supervisor with a level of 205. He reckons that with this person, the overgeared Master Yeong, covering for the absence of power from others should suffice. Yet, he knows boss raids aren't to be undertaken lightly, as they also need to manage minor mobs that appear intermittently and adapt to boss monsters that suddenly change their attack targets. Otherwise, they risk becoming fodder for the boss monster one by one. Moreover, with Circlemus self-destruction after 3 minutes when its health falls below 30%, they must decide the outcome within that time frame. The supervisor then asks if they've all studied the boss's patterns well enough and instructs them to eliminate the random mobs that appear. When the mobs try to self-destruct, they should counteract with their strength. Raising his hand, he asks the supervisor what to do if their damage is insufficient. The supervisor responds that escaping to the portal is an option, but attacking, even at the risk of dying, is preferable. If no one is in the boss room when it self-destructs, the dungeon will be cleared, but they will forfeit the experience points and items. Then the supervisor, sword in hand and raised high, shouted at them that if there were no further questions, they should proceed immediately and ordered them to advance. The interns entered the dungeon one by one, while he sighed to the side, knowing there was no turning back now. Yeong inquired if his name was Geonwoo and remarked that his level was higher than the others, asking if he had ever defeated a boss. Then Minseok appeared and informed Yeong that Geonwoo had defeated bosses over 3 times. He questioned Minseok on this, but Minseok just winked at him. Yeong suggested that the 3 of them should stick together since his actual experience was limited to observation. He believed that by gathering and dividing roles among themselves, they would be much more efficient. Yeong then asked what they thought of his suggestion. Minseok agreed it was a good plan, and when Yeong asked if he was okay with it, he confirmed he was. Minseok shook Yeong's hand, expressing his anticipation and stressing the need to defeat the boss monster for his level up. Yeong agreed, mentioning he also needed the items dropped by Circlemus. Minseok noted their aligned intentions and proposed sharing a drink afterwards, to which Yeong agreed, while he stood silently in the center, pondering if the ultimate goal was securing higher dungeon entries through connections with the Keyball's son. He knew that connections with affluent individuals could facilitate access to higher-level dungeons for regular hunters. Yeong shook his hand, expressing his enthusiasm, to which he responded it was his pleasure. Following that, Yeong led them into the dungeon, convincing himself to be grateful for such a rare opportunity. Yeong, leading the way, smirked and smiled creepily as he entered the dungeon, unbeknownst to the others. Trailing behind, he sensed an ominous feeling watching Yeong enter first. Soon, Circlemus's remaining strength dropped to 30%, and it was about to self-destruct when an undead rose from underground, overwhelming the interns with its number being over 50 and their level 100 higher than usual. Meanwhile, he managed to crack one of the undead's heads, then heard Minseok question their next move, concerned they might fail at this rate. Yeong called for someone to provide support at his position. The supervisor, engaged with the boss, demanded to know their status and instructed them to quickly dispatch the minor mobs and join the main fight. He informed the supervisor about the overwhelming number of skeletons, questioning how they were supposed to assist. Minseok then shoved the skeleton he was combating, urging him to rush to defeat Circlemus while he held off the skeletons. Questioning Minseok's solo strategy and expressing concern for his safety, Minseok assured him to endure for just 1 minute and assist the supervisor. Yeong, placing a hand on his shoulder, urged that they finish the task swiftly. He looks at the supervisor fighting the boss alone, clenches his teeth, and jumps toward the boss while telling Minseok to hold on for 30 seconds because he'll finish it in that time. Then they face the Circlemus, which only has 27% strength, and they continuously attack it while the supervisor tells them to hurry up. He gave his all and hit the boss with all his might, making the boss's strength decrease to 23%, and the system showed them that their remaining time was 50 seconds. He looked at the timer that was decreasing and realized that their attack was not going to work in time, so he tells the supervisor that it was not working and they needed to retreat. But the supervisor tells him that they could do it and it was not over until it was over. He thinks the supervisor is crazy because his words are something one might say in a sports match, but they are not in a sports match, and if they continue like this, they will be completely annihilated. Suddenly, someone shouted to him to watch out, and fortunately, he sidestepped in time to avoid the skeleton's attack, but he got a small cut on the nose. Then he positioned himself and slashed the skeleton's body. The skeleton slammed on the ground while he was shouting that it was insane and they almost died. However, he was stunned in shock when he saw a swarm of skeletons coming in their direction. The supervisor asks what everyone is doing and why the skeletons are coming that way, but then the supervisor sees the interns down on the ground, making him curse and panic. Then the supervisor ordered him and Yeong to take care of the injured because they're going retreated outside the boss's room, to which they both replied, yes. But then a skeleton stabbed Yeong's legs, making Yeong shout in pain. He immediately ran to Yeong and told him to lower his head, to which Yeong did, and he stabbed the skeleton's head. The supervisor ordered him to support and follow him while he secured the retreat path, to which he replied, okay. The supervisor called Minseok and told him that he was creating an escape route, so he should hurry and provide assistance, to which Minseok replied, yes. Then the supervisor faces the swarm of skeletons that are blocking the portal, and the system shows them that they only had 19 seconds before the boss self-destructs. He realizes that there is not much time, so he lifts Yeong and tells him to hold on tight. Then he immediately runs to the portal. Yeong apologized to him and explained that he had to focus on capturing the Circlemus and couldn't notice the skeleton. But he just tells Yeong that it was okay and they should finish the conversation outside. Yeong smilingly asked him if he was really okay, and he replied that he was, but he was in a hurry so he shouldn't talk to him. Minseok and the supervisor, who are in the portal, tell him to hurry up. But he just throws Yeong to them while telling them to catch him. With 6 seconds remaining, he manages to cut the skeleton behind him in half. When there were only 4 seconds left, he ran toward Minseok and their supervisor carrying Yeong. But then Yeong softly called him, making him confused. Then Yeong asked him if he clearly said it was okay, and with 2 seconds left, Yeong kicked him, making him thrown back into the dungeon. Then the timer hit 0 and the dungeon exploded inside. He saw his younger self running happily toward his mother and father, telling them he was there and he was going to become a hunter. His mother asked him why and if he wanted to protect people by hunting monsters. He replied, no, explaining that he just wanted to earn a lot of money and provide for his younger siblings. He also told his parents he would fix the leaking roof and replace the car that had been around for more than 10 years. His mother asked if that was really his dream, and he replied that he also planned to marry a beautiful person, so he needed a ton of money. His father laughingly told him that he had quite a realistic dream, and as his father was about to say something, he asked him what it was. Suddenly, his parents transformed into creepy monsters and asked him why he was lying down like that. He woke up in shock and realized he was trapped under a block of stones. Surprised that he was still alive, he couldn't see anything in the darkness, wondering if he was blind. Then he heard someone shouting his name. It was Minseok and the supervisor looking for him from above. The supervisor noted that, seeing the Circlemus drop items, it seemed like they were right about not being able to escape. Yeong apologized to them, saying it was all his fault that Geonwoo was gone, which angered him because he knew Yeong had purposely pushed him back into the dungeon. Suddenly, the ground shook and the stones above him began to collapse. He heard the supervisor cursing as the dungeon was about to collapse due to the explosion. The supervisor ordered them to quickly salvage whatever they could, abandon the items buried in the rubble, and retreat. Minseok told the supervisor they needed to retrieve Geonwoo's body, but the supervisor replied that there was nothing they could do, questioning how they could find Geonwoo among all those rocks. While he begged them not to go, insisting he was still alive, more stones fell on him. The supervisor reminded Minseok, who was crying, that a dungeon is a hunter's graveyard according to the hunter's code. Then, Minseok, crying, walked out of the dungeon, continuously apologizing to him, while he tried to emerge, begging them not to leave him. Then the stones completely buried him, leaving him without hope. Inside the huge stones, he wondered where it all went wrong. Was it the moment he couldn't ignore the injured Yeong, the moment he applied for the internship, or even before all of it? He asked himself why Yeong had pushed him. Was it out of hatred? Because Yeong was greedy for the items dropped by the Circle Master. And why would someone so wealthy do that? He cursed, thinking he should have just avoided joining the boss raid and gone home. Closing his eyes, his head was noisy with questions. But he knew that no matter how much he regretted it, nothing would change. The fact that he was going to die there wouldn't change, but then he saw his parents with creepy faces asking him if this was really what he wanted, making him open his eyes in shock once again. Then he tried to move his body, swearing that he would definitely not die. He opened his status window, which showed his health was 5/6,950 and his mana point was 120/300. He couldn't believe he had managed to survive and tried to grab his phone from his pocket. He opened his cell phone flashlight and saw stones and skeletons burying him, making him wonder if he could get out. Then a wind hit his face, making him look at where it was coming from and saw a small hole above him. He knew that the wind blowing suggested a high probability of a passage or an empty space, so he tried his best to climb up to the hole above him, thinking that even if he died, he had to struggle. From outside the hole, his hand came out and he managed to crawl out of the pile of skeletons and stones. He coughed hard but was glad that he had survived. However, when he looked up, he was surprised to see a huge and long corridor in front of him. He wondered what it was, knowing there had been an explosion, but this place looked too different from the boss's room earlier, and he noticed that it looked like some sort of passage. Then he heard something from the center of the passage and saw a portal slowly opening. He was surprised to see a dungeon portal there and walked a little closer to it, wondering if the explosion had revealed a hidden dungeon. Then he stopped in front of the portal and asked why his ominous premonitions were never wrong. He touched the portal, and the system showed him that it was a dungeon, rank SS, and asked him if he would like to enter. He knew that SS rank represented the highest difficulty level of existing dungeons, and even heroes, the top class among hunters, hesitated to take it on. He ran away from it while convincing himself that he hadn't seen it, prepared to rather live and die in a collapsing dungeon. But then, a huge block of stone fell in front of him, making him stop and confused. Suddenly, the ceiling of the corridor collapsed, and he ran back to where the portal was because the corridor ceiling was slowly collapsing in his way. He shouted that it was crazy and tried his best to run to the SS dungeon portal in front of him. When the ceiling above him was about to collapse, he managed to enter the portal just in time. He rolled inside the dungeon and stopped face down on the ground. Slowly lifting his head, he saw many tombs in front of him. Wondering if its SS rank was because it was a dungeon and not a cave, he then noticed something a little far from him, which made him panic, thinking it was a monster. However, he saw it had a level system, which brought him relief because the level window being blue meant it was a person. He thought that if there was a person there, it must be an open dungeon and that the person must be a hero who came to clear the dungeon, making him feel saved. He ran toward the person, calling them a hero and begging for help. But before he could get closer, the person released a strong light that blinded him and spoke a phrase indicating that he, who has amassed endless effort, there lies what he has desired. Panicking, he wondered what it meant because the voice sounded so clear in his ears even though it was far away. He looked at the man and excused himself, but the man didn't answer. He wondered what the man was doing, noticing it was like a pause screen since the man wasn't moving at all. He waved his hand and called out, but the man just released light again and repeated his initial statement. Initially stunned, he wondered if the man was an NPC, knowing that, even though reality has become like a game, it is well known that NPCs don't exist in real life, making him amazed and wonder if he was the first to discover an NPC. He raised his hand to reach the man, and the man repeated his words. Then he reached for the man again, and the man repeated his slogan. But when he reached out again, the man shouted at him to stop it, cursing, which shocked him. The man complained about trying to act like an NPC and getting stuck with that monotonous repeat, then asked him his level, to which he replied 46. The man acknowledged knowing it and questioned whether he thought his eyes were just for show and how a level 46 like him ended up there. He replied that it kind of just happened, which led him to ask the man who he was. The man replied that he was the manager there and, in game terms, guessed he was something like an NPC. He asked the man if he could tell him the way out, but the man replied that there was none because the only way to leave that place was to clear the dungeon by himself, leaving him shocked. Then he asked the man if he was joking and how a level 46 could clear an SS rank dungeon. The man replied that it was true but advised him not to get too discouraged because their level and health don't mean anything. He asked the man what he meant, and the man replied that whether he was level 46 or 500, he could be taken down and the only thing that matters is one thing: luck. He asked the man what kind of luck he was talking about, and the man explained that not just anyone can enter this place, which means he must meet certain special conditions to be able to enter. In that regard, he is already somewhat lucky. Then, the man hinted that maybe he would get lucky again and even find the hidden piece. He questioned whether it was possible with a level of 46 and only 5 health, but the man just turned around, saying that time was already up and he'd like to help more but couldn't go beyond his authority. Surprised, he asked if the man was leaving just like that. The man floated in the air and encouraged him to do his best because opportunities abound if he doesn't give up. He tried to convince the man to wait just a minute, but the man released a strong bright light while telling him that he Who has amassed endless effort, there lies the power he seeks. Evade death and find the truth, only one entity can save you. When the light slowly faded, he peeked and looked up, only to see a notification quest instructing him to find a weapon. Wondering what it was, he then heard the man's voice giving him a tip to keep a close eye on the sky because the rain there hurt quite a bit when it hit. He looked at the sky, then something bright in the sky, and a lot of things fell down. He was surprised when he saw that they were sharp, different weapons. A scissor sword landed near him, causing him to shout in panic as he danced around to avoid every weapon hitting the ground. When all the weapons had successfully pinned themselves to the ground, he looked at them, unable to believe that he had once again survived. He stood in relief, but then he noticed something in the sky blocking the light, making him look up, wondering if it was getting cloudy. Then he saw a huge bull falling from the sky and straight at him, which made him shout that it was crazy. The huge bull was close to landing on him, but fortunately, he jumped in time to avoid being squashed. He landed on the ground face first, and when he looked up at the bull, he was surprised to find himself face to face with it. The system showed that it was a giant bull with 3 question marks indicating its level, which surprised him because it meant its level was at least 100 above his, making him disbelieve he was supposed to take it down. Then he remembered the man telling him that the only way to leave that place was to clear the dungeon by himself. He thought in silence for a moment and realized he had no choice but to try. He then looked at the weapons behind him and picked up a sword. The system showed it was the Great Sword of Brilliance of legendary grade, and its attack power was 1050, leaving him shocked in disbelief. He wondered how he had gotten an item of the second best grade so easily and noticed there was no restriction on equipping it. Then, he confidently positioned himself, thinking it would be a lot easier to get out of that dungeon than he had thought. He ran to the sleeping giant bull and decided to finish it in one hit. He hit the bull with his Great Sword of Brilliance, but the bull didn't even wake up, and the system showed that the giant bull had received 0 damage. He couldn't believe that the attack did nothing to it and heard the bull snoring. He ran to another weapon, knowing he didn't have time to hesitate and that he needed to finish the bull off while it was still in shock from having fallen from the sky. Then he grabbed the axe, and the system showed it was a barbarian warrior's battle axe. It was legendary, its attack power was 1100. And its special passive skills were reinforcement, attack power increased by 1 for each strength status point, and 75 additional attack power. He hit the bull with it confidently, but the bull didn't even move, and the system showed him that it didn't receive damage. Suddenly, the bull stood up, making him curse in panic. It turned around to where he was and stared at him for a minute. Fearfully, he said hello to it, but it just started to run toward him, making him run away while shouting in fear. But then, he turned around and stopped himself. He jumped to the side like a matador, letting the bull run past him. Then, he ran in the opposite direction to the bull while shouting for someone to save him. Suddenly, he heard the man laughing and telling him that his form while dodging was like a work of art. He was surprised to hear the man and asked him if he hadn't disappeared. Then, shoutingly, he tells the man that someone is dying over there, but he is just watching and laughing. The man tells him that he hasn't died, making him angry, and he swore that if he got out of there somehow, he was definitely going to kill both Hyung and that man. Then he stopped, remembering that while he was still in school, the teachers had said during the exam periods that the answer lies within the problem. He also remembered the man telling him that only one entity could save him, making him realize that it basically meant that among those many weapons, only one would defeat the giant bull. The problem was, which one among them was the real weapon? He walked into the center of the weapons, guessing that there were over 1,000 weapons spread out across the field. He knew the giant bull would finish him off before he could test each one. Panicking, he grabbed his head and asked aloud which one was the real one. Then, he heard the man telling him that he didn't think he had the time to be agonizing over it, making him look back to see the bull heading toward him. He grabbed a lot of weapons while shouting that if it wasn't going to die, it would be something close to it. Then, he threw all the weapons in his hand at the bull, making the bull angrier and causing it to rush toward him speedily, while the system continuously showed him that all the weapons he threw had no effect on the bull. He dodged the bull attack as if he were dancing, and the system showed that he had evaded it. The man told him to quit being a hunter and become a matador instead. But then, the bull became angrier and swung its tail to hit him. He immediately grabbed the shield near him and, fortunately, blocked the bull's tail in time, but he got thrown into the air, making him fall and roll on the ground. However, he managed to place the shield on the ground to stop himself. The notification showed that he had equipped the shield of the fallen king with a special skill, damage absorption. So, he was able to absorb some of the damage, but then the system showed him that he had exhausted all his health points. He knew his health points hit 0, and the stats the reinforcement effect added had all disappeared, which meant he had become a normal person. Then, he looked at the bull running toward him, wondering if he was going to die like this. The man called him an idiot and told him to get up, but he just told the man to shut up, and he wanted to get up, too. The man told him to pick up the weapon to his left, and he grabbed it. Then, the system showed that it was a wind sword of heroic grade, and its special skill was an air gun. It consumes 50 mana points and shoots out condensed air. He wondered what he was supposed to do with it, but when he saw the bull was closer to him, he raised the sword, and it released a strong wind while the man ordered him to aim and shoot in the 9 o'clock direction. He followed the man and released the wind. It moved him and made him hit the tree, causing him to cough up blood in the process. Then, he slammed back down to the ground, realizing he had no health points or mana points left, and his body was so completely trashed that he couldn't even run away. He wondered if it was the end. But then, he saw a shining dagger pierced into the tree. He stared at it for a moment, knowing that a dagger set at such an angle definitely had not fallen from the sky like the weapons scattered on the field. Then, he heard the man telling him that he hadn't guided him, he was the one to find it. He tried his best to stand up and jump. Then, he hastily climbed the tree and landed on the ground with the dagger in his hand. He looked at the shining dagger, and the system showed that its grade was unidentified and it required a contract to use. The system also indicated that he had found the weapon, so his quest had been completed, and his new quest was to finish off the giant bull and complete the contract with the weapon. Then, he saw the bull gathering thunder on its head. He asked the man if finishing off the bull would end it all, to which the man replied he was correct. As the bull charged at him with thunder power in its head, the man explained that the dagger possessed an unidentified skill, whose name and power were unknown, and the only way to use it was by stabbing the bull with that skill. Then, the man questioned whether he could do it and asked why he was hesitating. However, he faced the dagger forward as the bull charged closer. He shouted to hype himself up, declaring his desire to live. Then, he leaped towards the gathering thunder power and stabbed it with his dagger, causing it to shatter into pieces. The dagger pierced through the bull's power, causing a strong explosion. The next day, he opened his eyes, confused to see a perfect ceiling. He asked himself if he hadn't died, then the system showed him that he had completed the contract, which triggered the tutorial system. He now had to finish leveling up to level 10, which left him confused, pondering whether this meant he had cleared the SS rank dungeon. Then, a lady walked into his hospital room and saw him awake. Excitedly, she called him brother, but he simply asked her why she was there and if she hadn't died too, which made her angry, and she shoutingly asked him why she would die. Then, his sister informed their parents, who were waiting outside, that he was awake. His mother hit him on the back and angrily asked him what he had done to himself. He exclaimed that it hurt and asked his father to stop his mother, but his father just hit him on the head, questioning why he should stop her. Then, his father told him that if the situation was urgent, he should have thought about getting out, questioning why he stayed until the end. He knew his father was right and realized that Yeong was such a results-oriented brat that, when he tried to save him, Yeong betrayed him. He wondered what would have happened if he had pretended not to see Yeong and left with Minseok. Then, he thought that if he had done so, the incident where Yeong kicked him wouldn't have even happened. He also thought that if he were to argue where the mistake lay, he would have to say Yeong treating him as expendable played the biggest part, nor could he ignore that he had provided Yeong the excuse. He realized that he should have been suspicious of Yeong from the start when he approached him. Then, he laughingly told his parents that he had come back safely and they shouldn't worry because he would take care of himself from now on. His sister told him that it seemed like he would be better off giving up on being a hunter, which confused him, and he asked his sister why. Then he assured his sister that he would be careful from now on. But his sister said that wasn't the reason and looked at their parents, who were silent, making him wonder if something was wrong. His sister helped him stand up while pointing at the mirror, telling him not to be shocked by it because they would love him the same. He looked in the mirror and saw that he was only level 1, which shocked him. He panicked and shoutingly asked what the hell it was. A moment later, he was alone in his room, thinking that he had always given it his all and hadn't even dreamed of becoming fabulously wealthy. He simply wished to live a normal life, free from the poverty he was so sick of. Then, he cursed in frustration and asked how this could have happened when he had suffered for 7 years. Then, he once again saw his level reflection in the mirror and calmly asked himself why it had even happened. He remembered that they said he was discovered in front of the portal to the D-class dungeon that had collapsed as a level 1. He knew it was a completely unexplainable situation and could only assume that something had happened after he lost consciousness from his last battle. He wondered if he must enter that SS rank dungeon again to ask the man. But he didn't know how he could do it, and he had no guarantee that the dungeon would reappear. He buried his face in the pillow, thinking it was so unfair. After he somehow managed to clear the SS rank dungeon, he couldn't even obtain items and got reverted to level 1. Then, a mosquito flew to him and landed on his pillow. He was annoyed because, although his family had given him space and left, The mosquitoes were swarming him. He swung his hand to drive the mosquito away, deciding to hold himself back just this once. Then he sat back up, wondering what he should do when he didn't know how to do anything else, and asked himself if he needed to take out a loan and do dungeon tours. He was busy thinking that it would take a lot of money to execute his plan, but it would be immediately helpful for him to level up when the mosquito flew back to him and landed on the wall near him. Annoyed, he squeezed the mosquito with his hand while shouting power smash. He successfully killed the mosquito and proudly thought that after spending 7 years fighting monsters, even if he had been reduced to level 1, there was no way he'd let a mosquito get the better of him. Suddenly, the system showed him that tutorial mode was activated, leaving him confused. Then, the system began to spam, showing him that by hunting one creature over 10, he could acquire experience through killing a creature that is not a monster. He received 1 experience point for killing a mosquito. Once the tutorial ends, he would no longer be able to acquire experience through killing creatures that are not monsters. His level increased, he received 5 points and all his debuffs disappeared. But his health points and mana points were recovering. His sister and mother, who heard him shouting, crushingly entered his room asking him what was going on and what was wrong. He calmly replied that he leveled up, and his mother asked him what he meant by he leveled up. He told his mother that he had killed a mosquito and leveled up. His sister checked him and told their mother that he didn't have a fever. Then, she suggested to her mother that it might be better if he saw a psychiatrist, to which their mother replied that it sounded like a good idea. He was furious and shouted to them that he was telling the truth, but his sister just pointed to the mirror and shoutingly told him to face reality. He peeked at the mirror and was shocked to see that he was still level 1, making him shout that it was impossible. He checked the system, knowing that he was not mistaken about what he saw because it definitely said his level had increased. However, because he was too excited, there seemed to be a message he missed. Then, he found that the system said the effect from the contract of the beginner's dagger had been activated, so his level had been reset to 1. He wondered if that beginner's dagger was the weapon he used while fighting the giant bull, and if he became level 1 because of it. He called his sister, Seora, to ask her where his dagger was. She asked him if he meant the weapon he was holding when he was discovered and told him that a person from the government had come to investigate it. He grabbed Seora in panic and asked her where the dagger was now. She replied that it was in the locker for personal belongings on the 1st floor and asked him what was with him all of a sudden. But he just cursed and ran off immediately, making his mother worriedly ask him where he was going. He remembered that, according to what that man he met in the SS rank dungeon said, that dagger was the hidden piece. He grabbed the door handle, thinking that the dagger was a powerful secret weapon only given to people who cleared the quest under specific conditions. But as he was about to open the door, it opened from the outside, hitting his head and making him fall to the floor. He looked up, apologizing, but he was surprised to see Yeong holding a flower in front of him. Then Yeong, smiling, told him that it looked like the patient was already up. He glared at Yeong in anger and grabbed Yeong's collar while cussing. His mother stopped him, asking him what the hell he was doing, and told him that Yeong was the one paying for his hospital bills instead of the guild. He asked his mother why she was even staying and was about to tell his mother that Yeong did it. Yeong told his mother that it was fine because he got into that state while saving him, so he couldn't complain even if Geonwoo wanted to do worse. He pushed his mother and sister outside and told them to leave for a moment because the two of them needed to have a chat. His mother worriedly asked him what he intended to do to Yeong, and he told his mother not to worry because what he could do when he was level 1. Then he asked Seora if she could take their mother and father to the cafe for a little while, to which she agreed. When he was sure they were out of the room, he angrily told Yeong to let him ask him something and asked why he did it. Yeong replied that there was not much to it and he undergoes tests every day as the heir, and that day's assignment was the token of Circlemus. But when Circlemus self-destructed, someone needed to be in the boss room for the items to drop, and he just happened to be the one at that time. He furiously asked Yeong if he sent a person to his death just for that stupid test, but Yeong angrily asked him what he meant by stupid. Then, he shouted at him that management succession is like a life and death matter and he must win it even if he has to trample on his older brothers, but a poor person like him with poor parents wouldn't understand any of it. He grabbed Yeong's collar in anger and called Yeong a piece of shit, but Yeong just warned him not to try to pull anything and tells him that even if he spread rumors or sued, the only one who'd end up suffering is him. He remembered that he was considering just moving past all of it if Yeong only had properly apologized and provided him with the settlement money, but now he was pissed and asked Yeong what if he refused. Yeong replied that they'd end up in a conflict and asked him if he thought he'd be okay with it. Then, Yeong teasingly told him that after seeing his younger sister earlier, he'd say that she was rather pretty, making him snaps in anger and launch his fist to punch Yeong's face. But when his fist was closer to Yeong's face, Min-seok hugged him from behind and cryingly shouted that he was really alive. He irritatedly told Min-seok to let him go, but Min-seok continued to hug him and cry, making Yeong laughingly tell him that he could tell from when he first met them that they really do have a special bond. Then, Yeong walked to the door to leave and told him that he'd like to stay and chat some more, but he wouldn't want to interrupt them, so he'll see him next time. He shoutingly told Yeong to stay right there, but Yeong just left. He told Min-seok to back off because it was weirding him out. But Min-seok just told him that he had thought he had left them forever. He pushed Min-seok away from him while shouting, telling him to back off. Min-seok asked him if he wasn't being a bit harsh, especially since he had even brought his weapon. He asked Min-seok which weapon he was talking about, and Min-seok, reaching under his coat, replied that it was the one he had been holding when he was found. Then, Min-seok showed him the dagger, explaining that the investigation had finished, so he had brought it with him. He snatched the dagger from Min-seok, taking him by surprise, and told him that he would have gone looking for it himself. He stared at the dagger, certain that it was the one he had used in the SS rank dungeon. Min-seok asked him why he was holding onto it so tightly and remarked that it looked like a rather basic dagger. He simply asked Min-seok what the investigation had concluded about it. Min-seok replied that the investigation determined the dagger was of regular grade, with an attack power of 100 and no special abilities. This made him wonder if the hidden item he had obtained in the SS rank dungeon was indeed that basic, but he was convinced it was not possible. Hours later, he was alone in his hospital room, staring at the dagger. He ordered the system to identify it, and the system revealed that it was a beginner's dagger of mythic grade, with an attack power of 5,500. Its skill, a level 1 annihilation strike, would be activated when his HP reached 0, granting him invincibility for 10 seconds and destroying all of the target's HP, irrespective of the amount. The system also indicated that it was a sole contract item, meaning only the contractor could use the item's effects and access the item's information. He was surprised to learn that it was supremely powerful and, since it was a sole contract item, other people couldn't see its information. Then, he read that the sole contract effect set the contractor's level and the required experience for leveling up to 1. He was thrilled upon realizing that if the required experience for leveling up was 1, it meant he could level up with each monster he killed. He knew the drawback was that his level would be reset to 1, but he considered it a minor issue because it was just how it appeared on the outside. In reality, his stats would remain permanent. He also knew that possessing the dagger could disrupt the balance significantly. He felt that holding onto it would only bring more complications, making him wonder if selling it might be a better option. However, he remembered that only he could see its information, indicating it was an item that only the contractor could use. He realized that to sell the dagger, he would have to break the contract, which would require his death. Lying back on his bed in frustration, he concluded that dying just to sell the dagger wasn't an option. It left him with one choice: to navigate the dungeons himself. He considered that if he utilized the dagger effectively, he could safely clear C-rank dungeons, or perhaps even B-rank dungeons, which would be more beneficial in the long run. Then, the system displayed 5 sets. The first was the cataclysmic First Hunter set, of which he currently had 1 out of 5 pieces. For the second, he would receive 1 special skill. For the third, 2 special skills. For the fourth, 3 special skills, and the fifth was unknown. He realized the complication. Other items in the set meant that if someone were to interfere, they might attempt to kill him to acquire the full set for themselves, as Choi Yeong had done. Sitting up, he acknowledged that the situation could escalate and decided it was best to proceed alone. He then decided to complete the tutorial first. A mosquito landed on the wall, and he squashed it with his hand, adding to his creature count. He then began hunting mosquitoes throughout his room and eventually succeeded in hunting 10 creatures. The system announced that he had completed the tutorial and should confirm his reward. He smiled, relieved that it was over, and looked around, wondering how to confirm his reward. Suddenly, he heard something fall, causing confusion. Looking up, he was shocked to see a treasure chest plummeting toward him. Fortunately, he jumped in time as the chest slammed onto the floor. He looked at the huge chest in front of him and walked closer, thinking that chests falling from above were really becoming a trend. He stared at it in amazement for a moment, half expecting gold bars to come out. As he slowly opened it, he wondered aloud if this would make him rich without even needing to enter dungeons. However, he fell silent upon seeing just a shirt inside. He pulled it out and questioned what it was, then noticed it was a dirty sleeveless shirt, complete with holes. In anger, he threw it away, but then someone clicked the room light on, and the dirty shirt ended up hitting someone's face. The other man entered the room, shocked to see his team leader with dirty clothes on his face, while he looked back, wondering what the issue was. Then, he noticed the man's uniform was that of the Hunter Management Agency, making him realize his mistake. The man took the shirt off his face, commenting that they had mentioned he seemed mentally disturbed, which seemed to be accurate. He apologized fearfully to the man. The man tossed the shirt aside and stared at him, and he stared back, wondering how someone could be that good looking. Then, the man introduced himself as Young Sehun, the team leader of Public Security, Division 4 of the Hunter Management Agency, and inquired if he had leveled up. He was surprised by Sehun's question, pondering how Sehun knew and whether Seora had told him. Sehun then called over Deputy Kim and ordered him to measure him, to which Kim agreed. As Kim measured him with the device, he wondered if it was a stat measuring device, realizing the seriousness of the situation. When the device completed its scan, Kim reported to Sehun that Geonwoo's level was 1, with 75 strength, 66 agility, and 32 intelligence, the same as in the initial test. He realized that the portable stat measuring device did not show the number of distributable points, which brought him relief, thinking that as long as his stats didn't increase, he wouldn't immediately attract the Hunter Management Agency's attention. Sehun asked him if his name was Lee Geonwoo and if he was sure he had leveled up. He stutteringly replied that he was not sure. Sehun questioned what he meant by being unsure and pointed out that if he had leveled up, information should have appeared in the message window. He replied that it had appeared earlier in the system, but now it was gone. Sehun noted that this was strange and asked if he could open his status window to check it. He tells Sehun to wait a moment and opens his status window. The system displays that he is of normal grade, his available points for distribution are 50, and both his health points and mana points are full. Realizing his distribution points have increased, he acknowledges that leveling up wasn't an illusion, as gaining 5 points per level would total 50 points, indicating he has effectively reached level 10 without officially starting. The system then instructs him to wear the hole-ridden sleeveless shirt of the Night Walker, leaving him puzzled and wondering if it's a quest item as he looks at the shirt in the trash. Sehun, growing impatient, inquires about any changes in his level. He responds with a no, claiming nothing significant has occurred, yet Sehun, not convinced by his hesitation, probes further. He excuses his pause by expressing a newfound reluctance to discard the shirt, suggesting its potential usefulness and awkwardly advocating for the principles of reuse, reduce, and recycle to justify his change of heart, which leaves Sehun and Kim looking at him blankly. Kim then quietly suggests to Sehun that a doctor should be called, doubting the credibility of Geonwoo's condition and attributing it to either awakening or special abilities. Sehun agrees, albeit softly, but Geonwoo overhears everything. Sehun, addressing him formally, warns that he should report any awakening or acquisition of special abilities to the Hunter Management Agency. He emphasizes the consequences of misusing powers without authorization under the Special Hunter Law. After they leave, Geonwoo breathes a sigh of relief. He acknowledges the underlying motives of the agency, recognizing they would have seized the hidden piece had they known about it, and resolves to keep it a secret indefinitely. He then dons the Nightwalker's hole-ridden sleeveless shirt, and the system updates its status to normal grade with 20 defense. It also showed him that he would receive an upgrade stone as a reward, and if he wanted to use it, he should push the upgrade stone into the item. Then, he heard a stone fall behind him and saw that it was a green stone with a green flame. He picked it up and stared at it, because he had never heard of an upgrade stone before. Then, he placed it on his shirt, which slowly devoured the stone. When the shirt completely consumed the stone, it released a strong green light, and the shirt's holes slowly faded. Then the system showed that his shirt had upgraded to a superior grade with 50 defense. It also displayed a new skill, level 1 stealth, which hides the user's appearance, disengages when hit, and consumes 30 MP every 10 seconds. He couldn't believe that its defense had doubled and it had added a new skill. Then, he noticed that its skill was quite useful, making him amazed and wonder how much it would sell for if it wasn't a soul-bound item. He took off his pants to test the skill out, and when he was completely naked, he activated his stealth skill and checked himself in the mirror. However, he couldn't see his reflection, making him think that it was scary. He noticed that he could see himself, but there was no reflection in the mirror. Then, he looked at his pants and boxer on the ground. He picked up his boxer, but it didn't fully become invisible, making him wonder if it only made part of what it touches invisible. Then, he reached for his dagger and was surprised that the whole dagger became invisible even though he just held its handle, which made him think that it needed more research. Then, the system alerted him that all magic power had been exhausted and his stealth would be deactivated. Then, his invisibility slowly faded. He was amazed that even though his level had reached 10, he had obtained a balance-breaking dagger and an item that allowed stealth. He shouted in excitement that he had hit a jackpot, but then Seora entered his room to tell him that the Hunter Management Agency had come looking for him, but she stopped when she saw him half naked. Seora called their mother and father to tell them that she thought her brother needed to see a psychiatrist, while he was trying to explain to her that it was a misunderstanding. Later, he walked out to the destroyed street and looked up when the system popped up above him. The system showed him the quest: he must defeat 5 boss monsters. He thinks it was the quest that appeared after upgrading the whole ridden sleeveless shirt. Then, he runs, thinking that to level up, he needs to hunt monsters, not just mosquitoes. Then, he stops behind a huge building to peek at the gate. He notices 2 hunter agents guarding the gate, making him frustrated because they are thoroughly monitoring the gates. Despite this, the Hunter Management Agency people can't help but still charge tolls. However, he knows he has to proceed, so he activates his stealth skill. Then, he walks to the gate, hearing the guards being bored, and successfully walks past them without being noticed. But then, he sees a skill sensor, so he deactivates his stealth as he runs past the skill sensor and reactivates it once he's out of its range. Then, he ran forward in relief, thinking it was just like a spy movie. Then, he arrived at the lane where hunters were lining up for their dungeons. He walked around, wondering why the D-rank dungeons were so crowded on the day he was there when it was usually empty. Then, the system showed him more than 50% of his mana points were depleted, so his stealth would be deactivated in 40 seconds. He immediately ran to the dungeons because he had decided to enter any dungeon. But then his phone buzzed, and he heard the message from the Hunter Management Agency that the B-rank dungeon had clearly failed. So the portal was open and it was located at Cafe Dona near Gangnam Station Exit 12. He realizes that Exit 12 is that way, but then something barges into the cafe behind him. He looks back in shock and sees a lizard warrior glaring at him. Then, it launches at him, hitting him in the shoulder, which makes him shout in pain, and slams him on the ground. The system showed him that due to his low skill level, monsters had detected his stealth. He was hit, which deactivated his stealth, and he received damage exceeding his tolerance, which made his health points drop to 0. He realized that he should be more careful near dungeons and that he let his guard down because he was in stealth. Then, the system alerts him that he has achieved the condition which activates the Annihilation Strike, granting him invincibility for 10 seconds, and he can destroy all of the target's health points irrespective of the amount. He stands up, knowing that he had the chance to avoid it, and decides to reflect on it. But he knows that he should deal with the lizard warrior who caused him to reflect on it first. Then, he uttered equipment, and his dagger appeared in his hand. He looked at it, thinking that soul-bound items are incredible, just a word, and it's equipped. The lizard warrior charged at him, striking continuously with its weapon. But the sleeveless shirt shielded him. He was amazed because, despite knowing he was being hit, he felt no damage at all, as if there was an invisible iron plate wrapped around his body. The lizard warrior stared at him in horror upon realizing its attacks were futile, and he asked it, "Are you done?" Then, he leaped towards it, declaring, "Now it's my turn." He launched his shining dagger at the lizard warrior's neck, effortlessly causing the lizard warrior's head to explode. Upon landing, the system notified him that he had defeated the lizard warrior, granting him 1 experience point. His level increased, he gained 5 points, all abnormal status effects were removed, his health and magic power were restored, and his contract effect reset his level to 1. The lizard warrior's body vanished as he marveled at the dagger's power, acknowledging the aptness of the skill name Annihilation Strike. Suddenly, he heard people approaching. He saw a hunter asking a lady about the source of the light and sound, wondering if a knight or something had come. The lady pointed towards him, guessing he was the one who killed it, which made him panic, knowing discovery would force him to explain how a level 1 like him defeated a B-rank monster, risking exposure of his hidden skill. He immediately ran to hide, only slightly distancing himself from the hunters when another lizard monster emerged from the cafe and struck his head with its weapon. His cup flew away, but fortunately, he was still in an invincible state, so he took no damage. Angrily, he informed the lizard that he still had 1 second left, making it sweat and shout in fear. Then, with a swing of his dagger, he made it vanish instantly. The system then notified him that his Annihilation Strike had ended. The hunters were incredulous that he had taken down the lizard in 1 hit and questioned if he was a real knight. They noticed his level was in the single digits, which he overheard, prompting him to run away in panic as one of the men tried to catch him. The men shouted for him to stop. Fortunately, lizard warriors barged out of the cafe near the men and attacked them, making the men wonder how he had managed to catch the lizard in 1 go. Then, the captain left his men, prompting one of them to ask where he was going. The captain replied that he would catch the hooded man, so they should handle the lizard. The captain chased after him and called out, making him think they were persistent. However, he was shocked to see more hunters in front of him. The captain told the others to catch him, but he simply used his stealth skill and disappeared right in front of them. He ran to the side while the men confusedly asked each other if there had been a person in front of them just now, guessing that he had used stealth. The captain furiously asked the men how they could miss him, but they retorted, asking what they could do if that person suddenly used stealth, why he was chasing the man, and if the man had done anything wrong. The captain replied that the guy had taken down a lizard warrior in one hit. The man in front couldn't believe it, noting that he was just level 1. The captain also mentioned that he used stealth too and asked if they knew what that meant. The bald man replied that it meant the person must have a legendary or mythic grade item. The captain thought they had hit the jackpot and asked the bald man what the rule was about things that fall to the ground. The bald man smiled and replied, "Finders keepers." Realizing they were unscrupulous individuals who wouldn't hesitate to be cruel for money, he decided to quickly enter another dungeon. However, he stepped on broken glass on the ground, which made a loud noise and drew the attention of the men. The captain swung his huge sword in his direction, but fortunately, he jumped away in time to dodge it. Unfortunately, his mana was low, so his stealth skill was deactivated, and when he landed on the ground, he was visible to the greedy men. He immediately ran away as one of the men swung their sharp steel at him. He danced around to avoid the attack, thinking those men were insane, and hurriedly opened his status window to invest all his remaining 35 points into his agility. After that, the system showed him that his agility had exceeded 50, so he acquired the sprint skill. It was a level 1 sprint that increases movement speed by 50% but consumes 1 mana point per second. He was relieved because it was the skill he needed right now. Just in time, a sinkhole with a dungeon portal appeared a short distance away. He immediately used his sprint and headed towards the sinkhole, leaving the men shocked, knowing that if a level 1 went into a dungeon alone, he would die. Then, one of the men shouted that if he was going to die, he better die by their hands. But he just turned around before jumping into the sinkhole and raised his finger, telling the men off in defiance. Then, he fell into the sinkhole, leaving the greedy men who couldn't believe he had just insulted them and left. The men looked down into the sinkhole, thinking it was over because it was not a party dungeon, so if they went in, they would probably just find another dungeon. The captain told the bald man that if they failed to clear the dungeon, a portal would open by force, and the dungeon the guy entered was C rank. So, they decided to wait for the guy to die, and then when the portal opened, they would collect the items. The bald man asked the captain what would happen if the man managed to defeat the lizard warrior. The captain replied that he was certain it was impossible for him to clear it alone because he had been to that dungeon before and knew it was a bit special, thus that man would never survive. Meanwhile, as he was falling, the system informed him that he was entering a rank C dungeon. He braced himself for the mission upon entry. Then, he landed hard on the ground, which made him groan a little. It felt like he had entered an SS rank dungeon, and he wondered if he would need a parachute next time. Looking up and around, he saw nothing but high walls, leading him to question if this was really a dungeon since it was too peaceful, no monsters, landmarks, or entrances were in sight. The system alerted him that the mission would start in 10 seconds and that he should prepare for battle. He took out his dagger while reading the system's instructions to survive by defeating monsters within the mission time limit. Then, a 10-minute timer appeared and something stirred from above. He saw that it was a level 90 slime monster. He was amazed to see the monster's level clearly displayed rather than a question mark and even thought it looked cute. He then beckoned the slime to come down, assuring it that he would take good care of it. However, as the slime jumped down, another slime appeared, leaving him confused. Then, more slimes began to jump down, and a swarm of slimes started to form. He was stunned with horror and eventually shouted, realizing it was a different story when faced with so many. Then the slime poured over him, making him realize that it wouldn't end with just one annihilation strike. He looks at his dagger, unsure how long the cooldown for such a balance-breaking skill will be, and thinks that if he only relies on annihilation strike, he could be out of options in that world during its cooldown. So, he decides to assume the worst-case scenario where he can't use annihilation strike. Then he uses his sprint skill to head towards the slimes while asking himself why his life is always a thorny path. The slime squeezed its body into two and hit him on his side. The system showed that he had only 80% of his health remaining because of the slime attack. He held his side, realizing that it hurt more than he thought, but he knew that it didn't matter because if he killed, he'd recover health through leveling up. Then he swings his dagger at the slime while shouting for it to die and cutting it in half, making him think that it was a success. But when the slime was cut in two, an eye appeared on both halves, which stunned him in shock. Then he furiously asks them if they are amoebas and why they are dividing while looking at two level 45 slimes in front of him. Then he attacked the slimes, but they dodged him, and another huge slime fell down above him without him noticing, which slammed into him and tried to squeeze him. He cut the slime in half, and it divided into two like the first slime. Then he realized that he was surrounded by the slimes. The slimes jumped around him at the same time and poured on him like rain. One by one, the slimes hit him down and buried him while he was shouting at them to come at him one by one. The system showed him that his health was decreasing quickly because he was being attacked by the slimes until 5% of his health points remained. He knows that he can't hold on any longer and he has to kill at least one level 45 slime. Then he saw a level 45 slime alone on the side staring at him, so he did his best and ran toward it while shouting that it was his last chance, but then the slime punched him in the face, which made his health points reach 0. On the other hand, the greedy men are still waiting outside the sinkhole, and the bald man asks the captain if he has to catch more than 300 monsters in 10 minutes. The captain replied yes and told the bald man that they were slimes that split into two, which meant the level 1 guy would never clear it. The bald guy asks the man if isn't it strange because it's been 5 minutes since the level 1 guy went into the sinkhole. The man agreed and asked if maybe the level 1 guy had some other item that was helping him clear it. The captain tells them that if that much time has passed, the level 1 guy should have failed and caused a dungeon break, but the captain still tells the men that they should wait because the level 1 guy may be using stealth to survive, and the portal will open soon, so they should get ready to catch slimes. On the other hand, he was busy cutting through the slimes inside the dungeon, increasing his level. He slashed and jumped into the swarm of gathering slimes, killing them one by one. His level continuously increased until he had finished all of them and was surrounded by dropped items. The system showed him that he had gained 5 points, all his status effects were removed. His health and mana were restored, and he was reset to level 1. But his annihilation strike had no cooldown anymore. He looked at the timer and saw that he had 40 seconds left. He opened his status window and saw that he had 1,500 distributed points. He knew that it had only been 9 minutes and 20 seconds, but he had already gained 1,500 points, as if he had increased 300 levels. He proudly thought that what a normal hunter takes over 10 years to achieve, he had done in just 10 minutes. When the timer hit 15 seconds, the system showed him that the boss monster would appear in 15 seconds. He expected that defeating slimes wasn't the end because showing the boss last is the highlight of the dungeon. But he thought, with a cheat item, there was nothing to worry about, and he could just defeat the boss monster with an annihilation strike. He grabbed the dropped items, thinking that he never thought he'd see such a day and that it was indeed good to have power. Then, he remembered the men who had chased him earlier wouldn't have given up on his items, making him wonder if they were still waiting outside the dungeon. Then the time hit 0, and the system showed him that the boss monster would appear. He should defeat the boss monster and clear the dungeon. He looked up, wondering what kind of creature it would be and if it was a giant slime specialized in strength or health. Then, something with shut eyes came out from above, and a huge wyvern flew around him, making him stunned in horror. He asked himself if it could be taken down with a dagger. On the other hand, outside the sinkhole, the captain was still waiting while looking down. The men told the captain that no matter how long they wait, the level 1 guy is not coming out, and it had already been over 30 minutes. The captain, raising his voice, told them that if they were complaining, they should just get lost, making the men annoyed and asking the captain why he was telling them to get lost after they had helped him. Then the bald guy told the captain that they would leave, but they'd like to be compensated for their losses. The captain asked the bald guy what nonsense he was talking about, but the bald guy just countered, asking the captain if he thought they were fools to have cooperated with someone they didn't even know. Then the bald guy seriously told the captain that they helped, thinking it would be more profitable than a dungeon tour, and since they missed the level 1 guy, he should compensate them. The captain was about to disagree, but then he felt someone behind him and, upon looking back, saw that it was Sehun with Kim from the Hunter Management Agency. Then Sehun asked them if someone had gone into that dungeon. On the other hand, the wyvern blew down blue fire at him, and he ran away to avoid it while shouting to the wyvern to stop spewing. He stopped to look up and saw it flying to the top, making him wonder why it hadn't come down even once in 10 minutes. He looked at his dagger frustratingly, wondering what the use of having Annihilation Strike was if he couldn't use it. Then he looked at the dropped item and guessed that he had no choice but to use the weapons scattered around. He reached for one unknown item, and it transformed into a weapon. Then the system showed him that it was an old javelin with a high grade and 50 attack power. He aimed the old javelin at the wyvern, knowing that he could only use it to see how far it could go, and decided to try it. Then he activated his sprint skill and forcefully threw the old javelin in the wyvern's direction. But it didn't reach the wyvern, making him disappointed. Then the wyvern flew down a little and spewed fire at him. He immediately ran away to avoid being burned alive and opened his status window, knowing that he needed strength. Then he allocated some of his distribution points to his strength and increased it to 110. Then the wyvern flew down a little more to attack again. But he grabbed a sword in time and threw it toward it, which hit the wyvern in the body. He was glad that he hit it and allocated more of his distribution points to his strength, knowing that it might not have even scratched it, but it definitely reached the wyvern. Then, he grabbed an item on the ground and threw it at the wyvern while shouting for it to take it. It hit the wyvern's wing, and the system showed him that his attack inflicted 1069 damage to the one-eyed wyvern, and its health decreased to 96%. He was so excited that he successfully hit it and grabbed some items on the ground, thinking that even with a shoddy weapon, he definitely had a chance. Then, he threw them all together, which all hit the wyvern and damaged it at different rates. A moment later, he continuously attacked it from a distance and reduced its health to 29%. He was frustrated that the wyvern had an annoyingly huge health pool. Suddenly, it swooped down near the ground, which surprised him, and attacked him with its flame. He didn't have time to dodge it, so he got burned and received 200 damage and took 100 damage every second for 10 seconds because he suffered a burn. This also decreased his health to 57%. He shouted that it was crazy because just a graze of it reduced 40% of his health at once. Then, the wyvern flew around at the top again. He grabbed the weapon from the ground and noticed that its attack pattern had changed. Then, he threw the weapon at it with all his force and told it that they should finish their fight quickly. But the wyvern just met his weapon with the flame, and his weapon melted in its path, which made the flame fly down directly to him and burned him to death. He received 5,000 damage from it, and his health points dropped to 0. He was sad that, in the end, he failed, but then the system showed him that he had achieved the condition, and his annihilation strike was activated, reminding him that he still had one more chance. He grabbed his dagger, and when the wyvern spewed out another flame to finish him, he threw the dagger with all his remaining strength to meet its flame. The system showed him that he had achieved the condition, so he acquired the skill Bird Pierce, which made his dagger cut through the wyvern's flame and straightaway hit the wyvern's mouth, causing the wyvern's head to explode into pieces and scatter everywhere. Then, a lot of dropped items fell down to him while the system showed him that he got Bird Pierce. His level increased, he gained 5 points, and his health and mana were restored because he successfully defeated the one-eyed wyvern. However, once more, his level was reset to level 1. Well guys, that's the end of the video. If you like this video, comment part 2 in the comments section. Also subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and like the video. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.